Hey guys, this is Ken McCann with Precision Powerlifting Systems. I'm going to talk today about what your mindset should be like underneath the bar. I was reading something the other day and it said an expert will dedicate their life for training to win championships, where a master will dedicate their training for life. And it really hit home because the majority of people that we're going to coach or that are going to participate in an amateur niche sport like powerlifting, there's a lot more to be had from it than 5-pound PRs or winning a gold medal at a local meet, national meet, world championship meet. There's just a whole lot more to it. And I think, where the average person doesn't really last very long within the sport. They kind of last 3 to 5 years. They don't last long enough to get some of these gifts that the sport can actually give them. So I think by highlighting some of these concepts, it becomes more important. And because there becomes this deeper dive into somebody understanding themselves while they're going through the training process, it can keep their attention and keep them wanting to train over the course of a longer period of time, because it becomes this journey of self-realization and just digging deeper and understanding who you are as a person, and then taking that understanding and bringing it into your everyday life. And I think that's a really important concept. And I think sports in general offers us so much opportunity to be able to do those things, where the more rich that we get, the more comfortable we get. And growth is not found in comfort. It's found in being uncomfortable. But we get this thought process that we should never, ever, ever be uncomfortable. So we're in buildings with central air where we keep the temperature to one steady degree, 70 degrees all the time here at JBF. We eat the same meals, we eat at the same times. Like, there's no periods where we're actually uncomfortable, but sports offers us those opportunities. And finding those uncomfortable situations becomes really important. So I've been posting about this a little bit, where I said we need to understand the paradox between good and bad, where it's not a contradiction. It can't be a this or that, right? And I think what happens with the mindset of lifting is it becomes a this or that. This isn't going well. I want that to happen. Right? Where you can't have the good without the bad. They exist together. And I think when people think of that concept, when it's like, oh yeah, I get it, bad things are going to happen. But when bad things happen, we're in such a rush to get out of that bad thing, right? So let's think about a plateau. You're going to have periods of stagnation. You have to. There can't be growth without it. So you're going to be stuck in these periods where you're not going to increase your total. But you get in such a hurry to get out of that it's like, well, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to do this. Instead of just allowing things to happen, controlling the things you can control by being present, by your effort, and just working on the things that you need to work on. You can't force those external outcomes to happen. You need to sit with that negative and be okay during those periods of time in order to be able to come out of it on the other end of it with the positive outcomes. But you got to understand they exist together. They exist on the spectrum together. It's not a this or that. It's an and. There is good and bad, and you're going to have both. And it's understanding this mindset that becomes so important in order for enjoyment and longevity to occur in a sport where you might go years to put 5 pounds on a total, right? So think of the amount of work and effort you need to put into what you're actually doing, and think of how little the reward is. But if you think larger than that 5 pounds, and you think more internally in the things that you're gaining from going through that process, you can be much richer than that 5-pound PR. So I'm going to talk about a concept called Satori. So this is a Japanese word. I think it was a Buddhist thing. But basically it's a intuitive experience of enlightenment. You can't explain it with words. It's really one of those types of things that it's something that you actually have to experience yourself. So it kind of goes with this quote, where knowledge is, you can communicate knowledge, right? We see it on the internet all the time. People are communicating, well, you need to do this, do that, whatever it is, right? And we're like, oh yeah, this makes sense. But then where does that wisdom come from? Wisdom comes from experience. So you can communicate knowledge, but you can't communicate wisdom. And this is an intuitive internal wisdom of who we are as human beings. And it's that whole enlightenment Buddhist type of aspect. Sport should be a gateway to this Satori, right? So here in the West, we probably view this as flow state. So it's a trendy little thing happening, but this term is from like 600 BC. Like there are ancient philosophical Eastern texts that use this term, and it really does sound a lot like flow state. So flow state seems to be like this state of being that we're all after. And sports is a gateway to this Satori or this flow state. Now, in order to get there, right, if this is an intuitive internal experience, right, of enlightenment, we have to know who we are first. So one of the exercises that I've given my group over a period of time, and one thing you got to understand as a coach is I understand that the majority of people aren't actually going to do this exercise, but there might be one or two that do. And there's a reason why average is average, because most people won't go through these lengths to do this, and they won't do the work. One, because it's hard, and I think people enjoy self-sabotaging themselves. I think it's harder for them sometimes to recognize the good in them and the potential greatness. And I think it's hard for people to want to put themselves out there, because if you make no excuses and you tell people, I'm going to give my all to this one thing for as long as I can, and I'm going to let the pieces fall where they lie. Well, if you're not a world champion, you don't meet the expectations you have in your mind, you can't justify it. So I think in a lot of cases what you'll hear is like, oh, we're just lifting weights. I'm just checking a box today. This is just a hobby for me. So people are always doing something to hold themselves back a little bit so that they have an excuse or a reason why they don't achieve the top level of status that they see from the people they follow on Instagram or whatever the deal is. But everybody's got to realize this is an internal journey. It's on the individual themselves. So they need to be able to look inward and understand that journey and be able to understand themselves as a person. So the first step in doing this is you need to understand your why, that deep internal reason. And this is a forever process. It doesn't just, you don't just come up with an answer and then that's it. And when I do this with people, I always, almost 100% of the time, get some superficial answer. And it'll be like, well, I want to be stronger. I want to see what I'm capable of. I had this type of adversity and sports lets me fight through it. And these things are really valid and very important, but there's more to it. It becomes deeper and deeper. So like my original why was, oh, I want to be a better coach. That's why I'm lifting, right? But I also think I was self-sabotaging myself with that statement because I'm doing the same thing. So now if I don't meet my expectations from a physical standpoint, I can just fall back onto my previous why and be like, oh, well, I'm just trying to be a better coach, so I have my reasons for not doing that. And that's not right, because leading up to my last meet, I hurt my back twice. I had to travel twice, but I kept training through this. And you don't just train through those things because you want to be a better coach. There were deeper reasons. And then my results were so poor. And like when I started really thinking about these things, I was like, man, I need to think deeper. The problem is, it's not even a problem, right? In order for me to display my strength, I have to allow things to happen, right? So I started digging a little bit deeper internally to kind of figure it out. And then I realized that like, wow, my why is really just an excuse. It's my conscious brain taking over. Well, what if I'm not great at lifting? Well, I'm just doing it to be a better coach, right? So I did the same thing. So then when I started digging deeper and deeper, and it took me quite a while to do this. It's been a couple months, or it's been 8 months since my meet. And I realized that what I'm really looking for is inner peace. So I had a really tough upbringing, and sports was always an outlet for me for sure. But it was always this glimpse of the future. So there was always this, all right, well, if I work hard now, I'll get a college scholarship, I'll get out of my town, I'll be able to do these things. And it just became this big process for me. But it was always looking forward. I was never really focused on the present moment. But when I was playing and I thought back to some of my best games, like I remember just stepping in between those lines and nothing else mattered, right? You could smell the grass, you could feel the ball hitting your foot, you know, whatever you're doing before the game, like to warm up and stuff. Just in sync with your teammates. Like there were these present moments when that was happening. And I would say with the MMA stuff, the same thing. Like sometimes the person across from you is your opponent, right? And you're fighting each other, you're doing the things. But then sometimes it's almost like, it's hard to explain. It's one of these indescribable things, right? Because Satori, you really can't describe with words. It's an experience, but we're going to try to do it anyways. But it's one of those things where they don't really feel like your opponent. There's just this back and forth flow that's happening where it's almost like the two of you are in sync, even though you're trying to beat the shit out of each other. There's this flow with that whole thing. I've never really experienced that with lifting. I think with lifting, it's always been, I want to be a better coach, which that's in the future somewhere, right? It reminds me of like being a kid and being like, oh, well, if I get good at this, I'll get a college scholarship and all of these things. But the problem is that future doesn't exist and it never will. There's too many variables to bring that future into the present moment. So it's a carrot and stick game. So I'm constantly chasing something that's never going to be there. And in doing so, I'm losing my presence in the only time that matters, the only time that exists, and the only place that I can actually get better, which is right now. So when I realize that my why is more for me finding inner peace, right? There's always been this turmoil and always this, I need a better future, I need a better future, I need a better future. But what sport has been trying to tell me is that like I need to just experience the now in the present, because that is what's going to bring the next present moment to be a little bit more fulfilling in the next present moment. So that's something I'm working on now, but that's how I stumbled into this term, Satori, when I started like researching it. And sport should be a gateway to this. And I've heard other like, it's been mostly like surfers and skateboarders and like action sports, athletes that talk a lot about this stuff. Like I think this was a Laird Hamilton thing, but he was talking about seeking out big waves, right? It wasn't to surf the big wave, and he wasn't even seeking out the big waves to surf. He was seeking out this flow state, and he was talking about how he needs consequences to get there. There has to be enough danger to get his physiology into a certain state for peak performance, and how he can lose himself in that performance. How he's just kind of one with the water and like in this state of flow, right? Where like time slows down. He's just so aware, like all of these things come into fruition. But he was talking about how he needs consequences for that. And so over time, the greater his skills became, in order for him to get into this Satori or this flow state, he had to seek out bigger and bigger waves. And now he uses foils with the big waves. He just had to keep upping the stakes in order to do this. So by him being present and him actually seeking Satori or flow state, he was able to surf bigger and bigger and bigger waves. And it's the same thing with lifting weights. If we want to lift bigger and bigger and bigger weights, we have to be present in the moment, because that's the only place that we can get stronger, right? But if we're lifting for a future that is never going to come to fruition, we're going to be trying to force things, and we're going to leave a lot of things on the table. We're going to get hurt. We're going to see longer periods of stagnation, I believe. Because when you force things, there's a way that the universe always tells you to try to slow down. And that's where I think those injuries come in. Or longer periods of just not getting better, because it's trying to tell you to like, hey, wake up, you're not where you need to be in order to make this happen. But if we're present and we have these intuitive experiences, right, where we're paying attention, doing all of these things, in order for us, right, training needs to have consequences. Powerlifting can be a pretty intimidating sport. We do a lot of max effort lifts because of the consequences. It creates this psychological environment where you have to learn how to control it and utilize it as a performance enhancer. And to be able to calm your nerves and your physiology when you need to, and be able to up your nerves and your physiology when you need to in order to perform at the highest level. There has to be consequences to get here. So this is why we use max effort lifts. But the more present we are and the more that we work on this, and we're in the moment, the bigger and bigger the weights will be in order for us to achieve these states. And I think more often than not, like regular people look for these states just in other ways because they don't want to put themselves in uncomfortable situations, right? Not to bring tough topics into this, but like think of drug addiction, right? When you hear somebody talk about the first time they're using drugs or what it feels like to actually use the drugs, they're explaining flow state. Like we're looking for that even in those circumstances there. And we're seeing an ever increasing increase in like drug addiction, which is getting us into that flow state because we're so comfortable all of the time. Like I think humans in general want to be like one with the environment and challenging themselves and being uncomfortable, and the growth that happens from that. I think it's a really important concept. So just to kind of summarize where we're at this point, we need to understand who we are and why we're doing the things that we're doing, right? Like this is a process of self-discovery. Like I said, an expert dedicates his life to training to win championships. A master dedicates his training to life. And we can utilize that same concept as amateur athletes to make us better at our jobs, better family members, friends, whatever it is, really important. So now when we go under the bar, in order to achieve this type of intuitive experience, we need to let everything go. So we had this saying when I was fighting, flow and go, which it rhymed, and I knew what coaches meant when they said that. When you're just letting your combinations go, you're not thinking about them, you're just flow and go. And I had soccer coaches who would always tell me to allow the game to come to me, because there were times, I think this is a good example, because I think people will be able to relate to this. When you start struggling and everything's speeding up in your brain, instead of taking a breath and slowing it down and creating some separation between what you deem to be the problem and what needs to be the solution, there's this inner peace that just wants you to get it over with, to move faster, to move forward, to get through the tough spot that you're in. And so the game would speed up in your mind, and you're trying to, instead of making the simple pass, you're trying to make the complicated pass. You're shooting from further out. Your steps aren't right because you're overthinking things. So now you're not performing in a fluid state. So then your steps leading up to the ball aren't right. You're mishitting the ball. It's missing the target. Whatever it is you're doing, you're speeding the game up and you're making it larger instead of just taking a step back, taking a breath, make that small pass and begin again. And that's all you have to do sometimes, is just begin again, is just not try to force things to happen. That the simplest action in that moment in time is a lot of times the best one. And then you get the ball back and you make the next simplest pass. And then you start building some momentum that way. And training is going to be the same way, especially with max effort lifts. You're going to miss a lift sometimes. That's okay. Sit with that feeling. You're going to. You have to miss some in order to get better over time, because you have to challenge yourself. There is this fine line. And you're going to go through periods of time where you're going to get hurt, but think of what pain does. Pain only exists in one moment, the present. So it forces you to be in the present moment. Like if you stub your toe while you're walking in your apartment on a corner of a table, it catches your fucking attention and it brings you into that present moment. So pain, and you hear a lot of athletes talk about their experiences with injury and how they come back as better athletes. And that's probably one reason why, is it forces you to be in the present moment, because that's where that pain exists. And it forces you to slow down, and it forces you to make the next simplest step and to do the best you can on that given day, and then to build from the best that you can on that given day while being aware and doing this over time. So recovering from injury, in a lot of cases, you're training like how an athlete should train. Now, in terms of like our mindset underneath the bar, I'm going to get back to my example with playing soccer. If we're in the future and we're trying to make things better and we're not in that present moment, our conscious brain is gonna speed things up, and it's like, well, we got to hit this weight because I need to hit this to be better in the future. And what you end up seeing is they'll move more slow, like the down on a squat, the down on a bench. There'll be more misgrooves. There'll be more emotional ups and downs with each make and miss. So, and I think in a lot of cases too, as coaches, what ends up happening is we give them a lot of feedback, and then their conscious brain takes that feedback and uses it as fuel. So it's like, oh, my coach said this, so now I have to pay attention to this, so now the conscious brain can take over training. And don't get me wrong, I think there's some benefit to actual like deliberate thinking in the very, very beginning when you're learning a skill. But there gets to be a point where the deliberate thinking needs to stop. Math, chess, school subjects like that, they're deliberate thinking problems. High performance, it happens too fast. It's not deliberate thinking. It has to happen in the subconscious. And the subconscious can't make things happen if your conscious brain is taking over, and a lot of the signals are coming from that. So if you're thinking about everything that you have to do, your conscious brain is taking over. You're never going to be able to get into that high performance state, that Satori or that flow state, because your conscious brain is too involved. You have to let it go to let it happen. So you literally have to be free of thought. Has to be no mind when you're getting under the bar. And when you're getting under the bar, you can't fight the weights. You got to feel the weight literally come through your whole body and just become one with your body. It's called the athlete barbell complex. So even when they talk about the physics of lifting weights, it's talking about the center of gravity of the barbell and the center of gravity of the person lining up and being one unit. It extends even further than that. Like, think of people, when you see Michael Jordan playing basketball, Tom Brady playing football, there's just this fluidity to them, right? That they're moving within their environment in a way that it looks like they're one with the environment. It's what I said about like the surfing example, how they feel like they're one with the wave. It's got to be the same thing with the weights. You got to just let it go so that those things can happen. You got to trust that this is a long-term process and that your body knows how to learn. And you just got to find things to be aware. So let's say your knees are caving in on the squat and your coach is telling you to push your knees out. You don't have to focus on that aspect of it. Just focus on something that brings you into the present moment. So it could be how your feet feel on the ground. It could be how the bar feels on your back. It could be how your breath and your brace feels against the belt. There's a number of aspects that you can utilize in that situation to be present. If you know what you're supposed to do to lift, there gets to be a point where there's nothing left to say. You have to let all thoughts go. And this is why meditation is so important, is it teaches you how to not necessarily control your thoughts. You're not trying to get your thoughts to stop happening. And you're not trying to get your emotions to stop happening. You're not even really trying to control them. All you need to do is be aware of them. You're trying to be in a state where they don't control you. And there's a big difference between the two of those. You can't control them because they're going to happen. You're human, you're going to have emotions. You're human, you're going to have thoughts. But the second your thoughts and your emotions start controlling you, you're being pulled as far away from this as you could possibly be. Distraction and negative thinking are the two things that will pull you out of this faster than anything. So you need to be in there. You just have to be aware of your thoughts and aware of your emotions and not judge yourself for having those emotions, and then just let them pass. And what meditation teaches you is it teaches you how to do that. How you can be before a heavy squat and be like, man, I'm fucking nervous. But you can take your breath, you can do your thing, and you can get into the state that you need to get into, and you can let those thoughts pass. And then when you get under the bar, you can have this thoughtless mind that's just exploring the environment. That's where high performance exists. It's not just from doing reps. It's not from paying attention to these things. Like, I think a lot of people, when they think intent, it's, I just gotta move as fast as I possibly can. There's more to it than that. Intent comes from those inner workings of who you are as a person and your reasons, your purpose for doing what you're doing. And if you have a superficial reason for doing those things that you want to do, that's not intent. You have to find those deeper reasons, because those deeper reasons are what's really going to drive that progress. This is also why I think like having some type of spiritual health or faith becomes really important, because these aren't tangible things you can measure or you can hold on to. Like, you can have all the fancy spreadsheets you want at the end of the day, right? Because you can measure volumes, you can measure intensities, you can measure RPEs. Like, that's all great. I think it's important that some of that stuff is measured, but it's the immeasurable stuff that matters at the end of the day. When you talk to any great athlete, nobody mentions the program that they're doing is why they got to the place that they got to. It's only the coaches and their egos and their pride that'll tell you it's that program that made them that athlete that they are. And that's never the case. I've never talked to a high-level athlete that was like, oh, these are the reasons why I became better. It's because of the program, the data collection, all of this stuff. It's never mattered. It's always been about the immeasurable things, the effort, the intent, the purpose. Like, think of how many professional athletes you've seen that won. They have strong faith. A lot of them, when they win championships, they thank God right away. Right? So they believe in something that they can't see or touch, and that's bigger than them. So having that belief in that piece that's larger than them like that allows them to push a little bit harder. Allows them, when things are not going so well, to have that faith that things will get better. That if they, what was his name? Chris Norton, college football player, got hurt in his first play, paralyzed till he's never going to walk again. He starts, badass story. He literally would do extra sessions to try to walk more, all of this stuff. Eventually he ends up walking again, which is incredible. But when he was interviewed in a documentary, he said, well, his dad, I think, had said this to him, but he had said these words, that's all about effort and God's will, right? So he trusted that if he worked hard, things were going to work out. And yes, maybe that trust was placed in God, a spiritual figure like that, but it allowed him to do those things. It wasn't God that allowed him to do those things, but it was that belief in God that allowed him to believe in something bigger when, you know, they're telling him he's never going to walk again, that he had less than a 2% chance or something like that. And I think that's really important to understand. We don't do that here. We are so egotistical that we think we're so fucking important and larger than what we really are. Like, so what you didn't hit a 5-pound PR? Get fucking over yourself. Like, and then we end up blaming everybody else for the problems that we're having. But like, we can't get out of our own ways because we don't believe there's anything bigger than us. So when that fails us, there just becomes this emotional charge to it. So having that belief in something larger is really important for this here. So I think a lot of people, that's kind of where they lack the ability to do these things. Like, if you think you're the most important thing, how are you going to stop your conscious mind? Because that's your ego. Your ego is your conscious mind. How are you going to stop your ego from talking the whole time while you're trying to lift? If you think you're that important and you're your own God like that, your ego is going to take over when you're lifting weights every single time. And it's going to talk, and it's going to think it can do it. And then it's going to get really frustrated when it can't, and then it's going to place blame somewhere else, because our ego doesn't like to place blame where it needs to be placed on us. So, I don't know. I guess this is more a rant than anything else towards the end here, but sports should be a gateway to these pieces, because these pieces are going to increase the fulfillment of your life. You're going to feel happier. And you're going to learn how to sit with uncomfortable situations and uncomfortable feelings and know that you're okay in them and be able to react appropriately. So maybe it's you're driving in traffic, but you don't get road rage. Maybe your boss says something to you and you don't blow a gasket and end up losing your job. Maybe your spouse says something to you and you're able to control how you react to the situation, and it allows you to have a long-term relationship. Like, there are so many areas in life that this stuff can come out of sport and help us with. To be a master, right? You dedicate your training to life. So these should be circumstances that you're improving who you are as a person, so that when you go out into the world, you're putting that positive energy out there and you get the energy back that you're putting out into the world. If you're constantly putting out negative energy to the world, you will 100% get that same energy in return. It happens to me all of the time. When I get in those moods and the negativity starts rolling in, I get way more flack from lifters. I have more problems with relationships. Stuff like that does come back at you. But the times when you're giving more positive vibes out there into the environment, you get a lot better things back. And it's a really important concept to take into consideration. But a lot of times what will happen, we'll get into these negative ruts. We'll blame everybody else for our problems. And we get stuck in this cycle. And then you multiply that by 330 million people, and that's what Facebook is, I guess, at the end of the day. But training should be a way to improve who you are as a person. And the ironic part is, when you can do that, that's how you become great. That's how you become your best version of yourself, even as an athlete, in terms of performance. That's where high performance is found. It's not found in trying to force it to happen, or in an Excel spreadsheet formula. That's just not where it lies. It lies internally with you discovering who you are as a person, being more aware, and the more that we increase our self-awareness, we're able to increase our self-reactions, how we react to the environment and other people, and our self-regulation, right? So as self-awareness goes up, self-regulation goes up. And we're just able to perform at a higher level in everything that we do. And that's what training should be. Sport should be a gateway to Satori. Am I right, Jess? Yeah? You sure?
Yeah, this is how I listen.
Oh, Jess was taking a nap. No? All right. You can follow me on Instagram. It's KWKNR Team Precision Powerlifting Systems.